Hey, how we doing? Okay, I was just doing some rehab of my dashboard. I thought I'd share a couple things here. This is my original ammeter. This is one that actually looked like that, but now is set back to that. I'm going to go ahead and reset this one and put it back in. This is actually pretty easy to do, but let me show you a couple things you're going to look for when you're doing this. These ammeters work basically on a magnetic basis. You've got a, hopefully we can see that, you've got a pickup there for your magnetic base, and then you've got a counterweight. You've got a counterweight that sits up here. It almost looks like a little bow tie. Now what happens when these things get out of whack, the counterweight is shifted on the axis, which is basically, it's like a pivot, which is what you have on a clock or a watch. You got a pivot in here and it's shifted on the pivot. So what it's done, and this could happen when you, if you hook this thing up backwards, it discharges, or it could just happen from vibration, I believe. So what I want to show you is how I go ahead and adjust this out of here. I have a lot of different, I have lots of pliers, clock making pliers. You don't have to have clock making pliers, but some good correction tweezers, but some good things would help. First of all, I notice this needle is really almost touching the gauge, so I'm going to reset that. There we go. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to take one of my clock tweezers here. I'm going to go ahead and hold that magnetic pickup on the bottom. And I'm going to take another set of tweezers and I'm going to adjust that bow tie. Either I'm going to push to the right or to the left in order to reset my meter. So let's get to work on that. Let's do that first. So first thing, I'm going to go ahead and gently hold that pickup with my tweezers. Take a second pair of tweezers. I'm going to go ahead and adjust that bow tie up or down depending on which way I think that this thing is off. Now I'm going to bring her back down a bit because I think that this thing is off. Down, not up. Let's see what happens. We're going to adjust that a bit. Yep, we didn't make much of a difference there. Let's adjust her again. These bow ties can be tight. It's counterweight. I'll call it a bow tie. They can be a little tight, so you may have to do some manipulation to get it to move on the shaft. Don't manipulate it too hard. The whole basics behind clock and watchmaking is patience. I have worked on something for a week and right at the end broken it on a lathe because I got impatient. Boy, that's a butt kicker. Alright, this is not turning easily, but I'm just going to gently work it until I can get it loosened up a bit. I'll swap out my tweezers here to something a little more, a little different edge. I'm going to try the other side. Can't get what you need. Try again. Let's try the other side of this. Wait. Hey, Jack buddy. That's why I have extra tweezers. Absolutely no movement. And Thanks, brother. Didn't say it was easy. I just said it was possible. Well, I can see one thing here, that this needle is really bent. The base of the needle is kicking off. Let's straighten that out first of all. Careful when you're manipulating this stuff, it's pretty fragile. Okay, I think we've got that more straightened out than it was before, the base. I really wish when they had built this thing, just as I'm saying that, what am I seeing in the back here? Could that possibly be a zeroing? Do they have a zero adjustment on here? Oh, that's just too much. Alright, we got to go get a really super fine, very, very tiny watchmaker screwdriver. Usually when I found these things, they have a zeroing. They have a way to zero out your meter right here. Now what I'm seeing is this little tiny set screw in the back. So I'm going to go ahead and right there we got a tiny little set screw. So I'm hoping if I go and get a small enough screwdriver, I may be actually able to zero this thing out. Now, this one here was skewed quite a bit and I was able to adjust the weights. But you know, I didn't take the time to examine the back because I figured I had the solution. Alright, so we're going to go get a small screwdriver and let's see if we can manipulate this thing. Alright, best screwdriver set in the world for clock and watchmaking, and a Bergeron. Why is that, Mark? Well, because the tips are unbelievably fine. I am talking very teeny tiny up to very large. Each of these little containers holds extra tips. And you can sharpen your tips. I don't replace my sharpener. I'm a cheap bastard, so here we are. Well, it's not turning. That doesn't mean anything. Let's just see if we can manipulate that a little more. See if we can get anything out of it. What the hell is that? Go and get my gun. Alright, we've gotten it broken loose. Although I am turning it, it does not seem to be okay. I got it. Let's try this. I believe what that is that's a pivot screw. That's exactly what that is. All that is it holds a pivot that holds the needle. Alright, that is not the solution. It's actually part of the construction. Okay, so I think my first thought was more of where I needed to be here. pivot in a little bit more. We don't want it too loose. Actually, what you would put on that pivot would be watch or clock oil. Now that I know that that exists, I'm going to go ahead and put some oil on my my other one. That'll help make sure that that moves smoothly. Alright, I'm going back to what I was doing before here. I'm going to go ahead and manipulate the counterweights. I can't see any other way to do that. I'm not sure how the counterweights got so far off on this one. Oh yeah, I can see it's got to go, that counterweight's got to go down. Delicate operation because these are very small parts, so you don't want to break anything. No, they look a lot alike, but they aren't. Alright, that is really irritating. Alright, here's the deal. I'm going to go ahead and soak this in oil tonight. Get some oil in there. Because that is not, those counterweights are not moving, and they should move. They've probably been sitting for so long. If I could find a way to remove my cover here, but everything is actually, looks like it's riveted. There are two small screws there, I'm not sure. This is definitely riveted onto this cover. The only way to remove that is to drill it out, and I'm not about to do that. So, Stuart Warner, you made a great little gauge here, but you're not telling me how to get it apart. Okay, we're back at it here. Alright, I went ahead and soaked this overnight, and then I took one of my nice fine screwdrivers. I went in, and this balance here that I talked about, this is the focal adjustment on here. This is where you got to adjust this thing. That's the balance right there, if you can see in the laser. That little black bow tie is your balance. You either slide it to the right or to the left, depending on where the needle's at. If you remember, this needle was pegged all the way over to the 100. It was pegged all the way over here because the balance was off. Now it does float around a bit, there's no doubt about it. You can tweak it a little bit more. I'm going to tweak my needle a little bit too. I don't want that out so far. But it does have a little bit of spring in it, so it's going to bounce. But if you look at it right there, we're right at 0 amps. Basically, as you put these things into your half track, they should balance out right at the 0 or close to it. Nevertheless, nevertheless, as I was, you're going to be able to read your ammeter properly. And I just had a call from a good friend of mine in California, and he has ammeter slammed all the way over, and now it's off. And that's because if this thing slams over so hard, it'll actually move those little counterweights, and then it will not come back up to 0. I think back in the day, as long as it was on one side of on the plus side, Joe, who's ever driving the track, didn't really care. And if the lights are glowing bright when you're running it, that's where you're at. It's a pretty delicate instrument when you get down to it. But what I'm saying is they are repairable. They are adjustable up to that point. I also went ahead and there's a very small pivot point, which is like a bearing in a watch. We call them pivots. Shaft in a bearing, pivot in a jewel. There's the pivot here actually sits on a real fine adjustment. An adjusting screw there that actually moves the pivot, the jewel in and out. It's not really a jewel at this point. It's just it's a bearing, so to speak. But I went ahead and lubricated where the shaft, this shaft here on this needle, which is what I want to call a pivot. The end of the shaft is called a pivot, and I basically oiled both ends of that with some very fine watch oil. So in the future, that should help the needle move, and I am going to do that on this one here too, because you know what? It's probably been 70 or 80 years since they were manufactured. Did anybody put a drop of oil in there? I use synthetic oils. And actually, let me show you this. This is interesting because this is what you find on watches. You do actually have an oil point right here. That little thing in the center is the pivot. That's the end of that shaft, and it's riding in that bushing. So if you put a drop of oil in, I use different synthetic oils. This is Mobile, which is a French product. It's very expensive per ounces, but it's an unbelievably beautiful oil. Thing with synthetic oils is back in the day, watches had to be serviced every couple of years just to keep the friction down, because of course friction is what slows any timepiece down. It's a mechanical timepiece versus a quartz or a crystal timepiece. So you want to eliminate all the friction points, or you want to eliminate all the friction in any point. That's why when a watch has 25 joules, that means at any point where a pivot's running through a bearing, it's a joule. And they all have to be oiled. That's why it's a more expensive watch, because it does an excellent job of keeping time. So the engineering is actually, a watch is just a machine, it's just an engine. And the transmission happens to be hooked to minute, hour hand, or second hand. Okay, so I consider both of these brought back up to snuff, and I'm pretty pleased about that, because let that bounce a little bit. Yeah, see how they bounce? It's a little off, and then when it settles down, it goes back to 0. So you know, if you lay it down, it's at an angle, so the weight's not quite straight. But the bottom line is, you just want the thing to where it's almost zeroed out, or zeroed out as it can make it, so that when the thing is operating in your track, you'll be able to read your amperage. Hey, just wanted to add one thing here. When you're working on controls like this, and you're putting them back into their holders and stuff, make sure you torque all of your screwdrivers and bolts equally. The reason I'm saying this is, this brass plate here, like any fine instrument, if it's out of torque, it'll actually cause the needle to stop moving. It basically it puts stress or bend in the plate, and it'll actually jam up your needle. So yeah, so be careful when you're putting this stuff together. And when I'm saying torquing it down, we're not breaking screws here, but we are making sure that we're doing this nice and evenly across the plate as far as tightening it. Put the same amount of tightness, and especially when you're working these nuts on your electrical lugs here. You don't want to over tighten them, but you don't want to leave them. You can't have one more tight than the other. I know that sounds silly, but you can actually do it by feel. Thing is, if you torque that plate, this needle will not move. Just make sure you torque your stuff evenly when you're putting these things together if you choose to operate on it. So, thanks for watching, and have a good one. Bye-bye.